Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into an absolutely fascinating biological mystery. We're going to unpack a truly groundbreaking 2025 clinical trial where scientists decided to test a psychedelic compound against the world's fastest-growing neurological disease. The findings here, they aren't just surprising, they're forcing us to completely rethink how we understand brain degeneration and repair.
But first, to really grasp the urgency of this research, we have to look at the sheer scale of the crisis in front of us. Parkinson's disease is expanding rapidly. By the year 2040, global cases are projected to blow past a staggering 10 million people. It is literally the fastest-growing neurological disorder on the planet right now.
And the financial weight of this? It's staggering. In the US alone, the economic burden hit $82.2 billion in 2024. And get this, that figure arrived a full decade ahead of original projections. Yet, despite billions of dollars and decades of research, we still have absolutely zero approved disease-modifying therapies anywhere in the world. Recent massive trials for standard drugs have totally failed their primary endpoints. We can treat the symptoms, sure, but we cannot stop the disease itself.
So let's jump straight into part one, the problem, the two diseases inside Parkinson's.
Now, to figure out why current treatments are failing so consistently, we really need to completely reframe what this disease actually is. When most of us think of Parkinson's, we instantly picture the motor symptoms, right? The tremor, the rigidity, the shuffle. That's caused by the loss of dopamine in a specific brain region called the substantia nigra. But there is a hidden half to this disorder. Up to 40 to 50% of patients also suffer from severe, clinically significant depression and anxiety. And the big takeaway here is that this depression isn't just a natural emotional reaction to getting a tough diagnosis. It is deeply baked into the very biology of the disease, involving multiple failing systems in the brain, and it actually frequently precedes the physical tremors by a decade or more.
So, the crucial question becomes, why don't our standard mental health tools work for these patients? Well, if a Parkinson's patient screens positive for depression, doctors typically prescribe a standard SSRI antidepressant. But structurally, these drugs just fail here. They work by stimulating serotonin connections in the brain. The problem is, Parkinson's is actively destroying those exact connections. It's kind of like trying to turn up the volume on a broken speaker. You're asking a drug to amplify a signal on neurons that are literally no longer there. Plus, standard SSRIs completely miss the underlying neuroinflammation that's causing the damage in the first place.
Which brings us to part two, the breakthrough, the Bradley 2025 trial.
This whole structural failure in standard medicine, it actually set the perfect stage for a historic medical breakthrough. In a landmark April 2025 pilot trial at UCSF, led by Dr. Ellen Bradley, researchers did something unprecedented. They tested a psychedelic in a neurodegenerative disease for the very first time. The primary goal was just to see if giving psilocybin to these patients was safe, but the secondary results were totally stunning. Patients saw a 9.3-point drop on the standard clinical depression scale. That is a massive, clinically significant reduction, and incredibly, it was sustained at the 3-month mark. So this wasn't just some fleeting mood boost, it was a persistent, lasting change.
And even more unexpectedly than the mood improvements, the actual physical measurements of Parkinson's tremors and rigidity fell by 4.6 points, and they remained below baseline a full month after the dosing sessions. No one saw that coming.
But honestly, here is perhaps the single most important number from the entire pilot study: 0. Across all 12 patients receiving the 10 mg and 25 mg doses, there were absolutely 0 serious adverse events, no exacerbation of Parkinson's psychosis, no worsening of motor symptoms. They conclusively established that this intervention can be safely given to people living with this disease.
All right, part three, the mechanism, the molecular battle.
To really understand how psilocybin pulled off these remarkable dual improvements in both mood and motor function, we need to zoom way down to the microscopic level. At the heart of this mystery is a specific cell receptor called TrkB, which you can basically think of as a vital biological switch. This switch is designed to receive BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Now, BDNF is essentially the crucial nourishment, the fundamental life support molecule that dopaminergic neurons absolutely need to survive and thrive. Without it, those brain cells simply die.
And this leads us to the core theory of the disease. In the Parkinson's brain, there's a toxic protein called α-synuclein. It aggregates and basically acts like an assassin, binding directly to the TrkB receptor, shutting it down and starving the cell of that vital BDNF nourishment. But here is where it gets crazy. Psilocin, the active compound in psilocybin, binds to that exact same TrkB receptor, but with the opposite effect. It powerfully reactivates it, and it does this with roughly 1,000 times greater potency than ketamine. So you literally have two completely different molecules converging on the exact same receptor, locked in a microscopic tug-of-war.
Which smoothly leads into Part 4, rewiring the brain, resolving the paradox.
So this microscopic tug-of-war is incredibly elegant. But it introduces a really interesting paradox about a totally different receptor called 5-HT2A, which psilocin also powerfully activates. We call this the pimavanserin paradox. See, pimavanserin is a current FDA-approved drug used to treat Parkinson's psychosis, and it works by blocking the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor. So the million-dollar question is, if blocking this receptor is the standard treatment for psychosis in these patients, how on earth can a psychedelic that actively stimulates that exact same receptor be safe for them? Well, the answer beautifully comes down to time and trial design. Pimavanserin is taken daily, right? So it constantly acts against the chronic low-grade receptor noise built up by years of standard Parkinson's medications. Psilocybin, on the other hand, provides a brief, acute 4 to 6 hour pulse, and research shows this simple, powerful pulse actually alters cortical excitability, leaving the receptor system less aberrantly excitable in the long run. Plus, safety was paramount here. The trial carefully excluded anyone with active psychosis or a family history of it.
Furthermore, engaging these receptors triggers this amazing dual-action healing process. First, it powerfully suppresses neuroinflammation in immune cells called microglia, doing so with a potency about 10 times greater than the steroid dexamethasone. Simultaneously, it triggers a massive surge in neuroplasticity. We are talking about a 10% increase in cortical spine density within just 24 hours. Since the pathology of Parkinson's is the slow erasure of synaptic connections, psilocybin appears to actively work to rebuild that exact lost architecture. It's essentially acting like fertilizer to literally regrow the brain's wiring.
Now for Part 5, the reality check, the missing evidence.
Because while this biological convergence is incredibly elegant and the early signals are super promising, we have got to ground ourselves in strict scientific reality. Let's pump the brakes for a second. Right now, there's a clear divide between what we know and what we don't. We know the 12-person pilot showed human safety and symptom relief. We know the microscopic receptor logic works in isolated cells. But what's missing is huge. We still lack large blinded, placebo-controlled trials. Astonishingly, there is currently no published data testing psilocybin on standard Parkinson's animal models. And most critically, we do not yet have the biomarker proof, like brain scans or fluid tests, to confirm true long-term disease modification.
Which brings us to Part 6, what happens next, the clinical pipeline.
Explicitly acknowledging what we don't know, where does this leave us as we look to the future of neurodegenerative therapies? Well, things are moving incredibly fast. Following the publication of that initial UCSF pilot in April 2025, and alongside wider Phase 3 successes for psilocybin and general depression, the next major step is happening right now. As of June 2026, an active, randomized Phase 2 expansion is actively recruiting 60 patients across UCSF and Yale. This trial is absolutely critical because it will finally utilize fMRI neuroimaging and biological markers to test for actual disease modification, not just symptom relief.
And that leaves us with one of the most exciting scientific questions of our decade. We've got a mechanism that perfectly targets the biological root of the disease, and early evidence showing it is safe to administer. But will this elegant microscopic convergence truly translate into arresting the fastest-growing neurological disease in the world? We are all eagerly watching the science unfold to find out. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.